My name is Lucas Mendez. I'm 28 years old, and I never imagined that a simple favor from my neighbor could make me question everything I thought I knew about boundaries, desire, and the invisible line between helping someone and losing yourself in that help. He lives there, 2 doors down from mine. Gabriel Santos, 34 years old, always in an impeccable suit when he leaves in the morning. Executive briefcase in hand, firm steps down the hallway. Works in accounting at a multinational corporation. One of those jobs that seems solid, reliable, eternal. Short hair, well cut, a few gray strands at the temples that only emphasize that appearance of a responsible man, someone who has his life figured out. Tall, 6 foot and change. Broad shoulders that fill his dark blazers well. Brown eyes that rarely look directly at you when you pass in the elevator. We've seen each other in the hallway for about 6 months now, since I moved into the building. Always polite, always in a rush. A quick nod, a courteous good morning, nothing more. Married. To a woman named Juliana. 7 years of marriage, I had heard from the building manager once, during one of those elevator conversations where people tell you things you didn't ask to know. I work from home, freelance graphic designer. My apartment became my office, my refuge, my small and controlled world. After my last relationship ended badly 2 years ago, I shut myself away. Not intentionally, it just happened. It's easier to be alone than risk getting hurt again. It's safer to observe people from a distance than to let someone close enough to cause damage. It was on a Thursday afternoon that Gabriel knocked on my door for the first time with something more than a quick greeting. I was finishing a project, that yellow light of late afternoon coming through the big window of my living room, illuminating the creative mess of sketches and cold coffee cups scattered across my desk. 3 firm knocks. Professional, if knocks can be such a thing. I opened the door, and there he was, without the blazer. White dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. First time I'd seen his forearms. Defined muscles. The kind of body you maintain by going to the gym with discipline. Not out of vanity, but out of control. A gold wedding band on his left ring finger catching the light from the hallway. He smiled. Not that automatic elevator smile. An awkward smile, almost shy, that didn't match his executive posture. He asked if I could do him a favor. He and his wife were going to travel over the weekend, visit her family in the countryside. Just 3 days. The plants in his apartment needed watering, and the doorman was on vacation. Could I do it? He'd give me the key. Of course, I said. No problem. It's right next door. Easy. He seemed genuinely relieved. He thanked me twice. Said he'd leave the key under my door Friday morning before he left. 3 days. Water the plants. Simple as that. But it wasn't simple. What I didn't know was that that small gesture would set off a storm that neither of us could control. On Friday, as promised, the key appeared under my door in a white envelope with my name written by hand in meticulous, almost old-fashioned handwriting. Inside, a note. Lucas, thank you so much. The plants are in the living room and on the balcony. We're back Monday night. Gabriel. I went on Saturday. When I opened the door, what struck me was the absence of smell. No coffee or perfume. Just cleaning products and air conditioning. An expensive hotel with no personality. The living room was minimalist, too organized, and no photos. None. 7 years of marriage and no record of shared life. I watered the plants, cacti, and succulents, easy to care for, and curiosity got the better of me. The kitchen was immaculate. No magnets, no notes. In the master bedroom, his side of the bed had books and a charger. Her side, nothing. In the closet, rows of his suits against half a dozen of her dresses. As if she were just a visitor, I closed the closet quickly, heart racing. It wasn't my business. I was there to water plants, not to investigate my neighbor's life. But my brain was already putting together a puzzle I didn't ask to solve. Separate bedrooms, in fact, even if only one was used. No photos, no sign of shared life, no evidence of intimacy. This wasn't a home. It was a performance. I left the apartment quickly, locked the door, and went back to my place. But the feeling stayed with me. That discomfort of having seen something I wasn't meant to see. Nothing scandalous, nothing dramatic, just emptiness. A loneliness disguised as a perfect married life. On Sunday, I went back to water again. Same routine. Same absence of signs of real life. This time I didn't snoop. I just did what I was supposed to do and left. Monday night, it was almost 10 o'clock when I heard his apartment door open out in the hallway. Voices. No, a voice. Singular. Him, talking on the phone. Tone low. Tired. A few minutes later, knocks on my door. I opened it. Gabriel was there. Alone. Without his suitcase. Without his wife. Wrinkled shirt. Hair a little messy. Dark circles under his eyes that weren't there on Friday. He said he wanted to thank me in person. Everything go okay with the plants? I said yes. Smooth. No problems at all. He stood there, on the threshold of the door, as if he wanted to say something else but didn't know what. His eyes found mine, and for the first time in 6 months of living in the same hallway, he really looked. Not that quick glance of a polite neighbor. A real look. A few seconds that seemed longer than they should have. And then I saw it. Not relief at having the plants watered. Not gratitude for the simple favor. I saw something else in his eyes. I saw the same emptiness of the apartment, but now with a face. The face of a man coming home to a place that was not a home. He hesitated, breaking his executive posture, and murmured a, "Thank you, Lucas," before entering his apartment. I stood there, heart racing. I knew. It hadn't been a thank you. It had been a cry for help. And the worst part? The part that made me close my door quickly and lean against it for a few seconds, breathing deeply? I wanted to respond. I wanted to cross that hallway, knock on his door, and ask if he was okay. Ask for real. Not as a polite neighbor, but as someone who recognizes loneliness in another person because they carry the same thing inside themselves. But I didn't go. Because he was married. Because it would be inappropriate. Because I had promised myself after my last romantic disaster that I wouldn't get involved with complicated people, with impossible situations, with men carrying red flags too big to ignore. I went to the kitchen, made a coffee I didn't need, stood looking out the large living room window at the city lights down below. Villa Maddalena at night, full of life in the streets, while I stayed up there, alone, thinking about a man who lived just steps away and seemed to be even more alone than I was. And I kept replaying that look. That empty apartment. That marriage that seemed to exist only on paper. And mostly, I kept thinking about the way my stomach tightened when he looked at me. Not from anxiety. Not from discomfort. From recognition. As if, for a few seconds, we really saw each other. Not the freelance designer and the corporate accountant. Not the single neighbor and the married man, but two equally lost people pretending everything was fine. Why would a man with a wife, with an apparently settled life, with a polished apartment and a stable career, look at me that way? And worse, why did I, who had promised to protect myself, to keep my distance, to learn from my past, want so desperately to find out the answer? I slept poorly. Woke up multiple times. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that moment at the door. Gabriel standing there, hesitant, as if he were at the edge of a cliff, unsure whether to step back or jump. Tuesday morning, when I went out for coffee, I ran into him in the elevator. We fell back into that old pattern. Quick wave, polite greeting. Him in his impeccable suit, back in his professional armor. But when our eyes met for a fraction of a second before the elevator doors opened, I knew it wasn't over. That simple favor of watering plants had opened a door that neither of us knew how to close. And the only certainty I had, as I walked through the sunny streets of Villa Maddalena on an ordinary Tuesday morning, was that Gabriel Santos was going to knock on my door again. Not to ask me to water plants, but to ask for something he didn't yet have the courage to name. And I, who should say no, who should maintain that safe distance between polite neighbors who don't get involved in each other's lives, already knew with that uncomfortable certainty that settles deep in your chest that when he knocked again, I would open the door. Because loneliness recognizes loneliness. And empty people are dangerously drawn to other empty people, in the irrational hope that two emptinesses added together might somehow, impossibly, create something whole. 2 days later, Gabriel knocked on my door with a bottle of wine in his hand. It wasn't just any wine. It was a Brunello di Montalcino, the kind of bottle that costs more than my monthly rent. The label was pristine, the bottle wrapped in silk paper as if it were a birthday gift, and not a simple thank you for watering some plants. To thank you for taking care of the plants while we were away, he said, holding out the bottle with both hands as if it were an offering. I stood there looking at that expensive wine, trying to process the glaring disproportionality between the favor I had done and the gift I was receiving. I had watered some plants for 5 days. It had taken 3 minutes of my time total. Gabriel, that's too much, I said. Seriously, you didn't need to. He stood in the doorway, still holding the bottle. For a moment I saw something in his face, an expression I couldn't name. Anxiety, maybe, or hope, as if accepting that wine meant something more than courtesy. I insist, he said. You saved me from coming home and finding everything dead. It was literally 3 plants, I thought, but I said nothing. I took the bottle, felt its weight in my hands, and smiled. Thank you, Gabriel. That's very generous of you. He visibly relaxed, his shoulders dropped, his expression became lighter, as if I had passed some test I didn't know I was taking. And then he just stood there, looking at me with those dark eyes, trying to say something he couldn't put into words. The hallway was quiet. I could hear a TV somewhere above us, the distant elevator hum. Want to come in? The words were out before I could think about them. Have some coffee? His expression changed. It became softer, almost vulnerable. I'd love to, he said, if it's not a bother. And that's how it started. An innocent invitation leading us down a road of no return. That afternoon, we sat in my small kitchen while he told me about the trip. Or rather, the fragments he wanted to share. The beach was beautiful, the hotel comfortable, the food excellent, very generic, very safe. He talked about the trip in plural. We did this, we saw that, but never mentioned Juliana by name. Never described a specific moment they'd shared. It was like listening to someone read from a travel brochure. I watched him talk, noticing his fingers tapping the coffee cup. How he looked out the kitchen window instead of at me when discussing his marriage. How afternoon light created soft shadows on his face, emphasizing the exhaustion around his eyes. And you? He asked suddenly, turning to face me. How are you doing? Working on anything interesting? The shift in subject was so abrupt it almost made me laugh. But I answered him, told him about a design project I was doing for a tech startup. He listened with an intensity that seemed out of proportion to the genuine interest a corporate logo pitch could generate. He asked questions, real questions, about my creative process, how I chose colors, what inspired me. No one had ever asked me these things with such genuine interest. When he finally left, almost an hour later, the apartment felt strangely silent. I stood looking at his coffee cup still in the sink, marked with the outline of his lips, and wondered what exactly had just happened. 3 days later, his excuse was a bookshelf. I'm hopeless at these things, he said. The shelf had 6 screws. He kept handing me tools I didn't need while I assembled it, just to stretch out the time. A week later, it was the slow computer. Nothing was wrong with it, of course. But it earned us 2 more coffees and a conversation about how he switched from architecture to accounting because it was more practical. There was a sadness in the word practical, as if it described a surrender. Do you regret it? I asked. He went quiet, turning the coffee cup in his hands. I think we regret a lot of things, he finally said. The question is knowing how to live with those choices. There was so much weight in that sentence that I stayed quiet. But I should have pressed, because what he didn't say was the key to everything. 2 days later, he knocked on my door again. This time I laughed before he even opened his mouth. Let me guess, I said. You need help with something? He had the decency to look embarrassed. He ran his hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I was learning to recognize as a sign he was about to make an excuse. I was thinking about making risotto tonight, he said, but I've never done it before, and I saw you have cooking books on your shelf. Maybe you could give me some tips? I leaned against the doorframe and studied him. Really studied him. I saw the faint blush creeping up his neck, the way he couldn't hold my gaze for more than 3 seconds, the tension across his shoulders. Gabriel, I said gently, you know how to cook. Not a question. He blinked, opened his mouth, closed it. I saw the pressure cooker in your kitchen, I continued. The professional knife set. All the spices organized alphabetically. You clearly know how to cook. For a terrible moment, I thought he'd make up another excuse, back down, do what people do when caught in a harmless lie. But he didn't do any of that. Instead, he laughed, a short laugh, almost humorless, but real. You got me, he said, and we stood there in the hallway, him outside, me inside. And something shifted. The pretense disappeared. The game was visible. Why do you keep inventing reasons to come here? I asked. My voice came out quieter than intended. Gabriel looked at me, really looked. And for the first time since we'd known each other, I saw something beyond the polished facade of the married corporate accountant living 2 doors down. I saw loneliness. I saw fear. I saw desire. I don't know, he said, and that raw honesty hit me hard. The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken things. Come in, I said. You don't need an excuse. He came in. We sat on the living room sofa, each at one end, maintaining a safe distance that felt both necessary and absurd. And then he started to talk. Not about risotto, not about shelves or computers or plants. How he felt invisible in his own marriage. How he and Juliana lived together but led separate lives that barely crossed. How he couldn't remember the last real conversation, one where he didn't have to maintain his professional or marital mask. I just listened. I didn't judge, didn't advise, didn't try to fix anything. I just listened. And when he finished, when the words finally stopped coming, he looked at me with such vulnerability that my chest ached. Thank you, he said, for listening, for not making me feel pathetic. You're not pathetic, I said. You're human. Something gleamed in his eyes, something that seemed dangerously close to tears. He left soon after, muttering something about work in the morning. But at the door, he paused. Lucas, he said without fully turning. Can I come back? Not with excuses, just to talk? Of course, I said. And he left. I closed the door and leaned against it for a long moment, my heart beating faster than it should. Because I understood what was happening. Every time Gabriel knocked on my door, he was searching for something he couldn't find at home, something he couldn't even name. And the most dangerous part? I wanted to give it to him. Whatever it was. That night, lying in bed and staring at the ceiling, I replayed every interaction. The wine that was too expensive. The obvious excuses. The way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't watching. The way his voice softened when we were alone. There was a pattern. A progression. First, a safe pretext. Then, weaker pretexts. Until today, when the mask cracked and he admitted the truth without saying it outright. He was lonely, and for reasons I didn't fully understand, he decided I was someone he could be less lonely with. So what was I going to do with that? Because Gabriel Santos was married. He wore a gold band on his left hand that caught the light every time he moved. He had a life built with another person, even if that life seemed more like empty architecture than a home. And me. I was the single neighbor who worked from home and was starting to anticipate his knocks on the door with an anxiety that bordered on desperation. It was dangerous. I knew it was dangerous. But when I fell asleep that night, I dreamed of dark eyes watching me, and I woke with a bad premonition. I was playing with fire, and I was about to burn badly. 3 days passed without a visit. 3 days where I found myself listening for hallway sounds, paying attention to every door opening, feeling ridiculous disappointment when it was another neighbor. I tried working. Tried focusing on design projects, client meetings, the normal life before Gabriel started showing up with weak excuses. But my mind kept returning to him. To how his voice sounded when he said, "I don't know." To that raw vulnerability when he admitted feeling invisible. The third night, I was in the kitchen making dinner when I heard the knock. Not urgent, hesitant, almost shy. I opened the door and there he was. No prepared excuse this time. No story about furniture or computers. Just him, hands in his pockets, looking younger than 34. "Hi," he said. "Hi." We stood there, and I realized this was the first time he'd come without a pretext, without armor. "I was thinking," he started, then stopped. "Tried again. Juliana's having friends over tomorrow night. It'll be loud and probably go late." He paused. I waited. I was wondering if maybe I could work here. I have reports to finish and I need quiet. Another excuse. But this time we both knew. No pretense, he actually believed it. Just a bridge. A way to ask to be near me without saying why. "Of course," I said. "Anytime." "Thank you, Lucas." The way he said my name, slowly, like he was tasting it. He turned to leave, but then looked back. "You're a good person," he said. "I hope you know it." And before I could respond, he was gone, his apartment door closing softly. I stood in the empty hallway, my heart racing. The question was no longer why Gabriel kept inventing reasons to see me. The question was, why did a married man need to escape his own house for peace? And more importantly, what was he really looking for when he looked at me that way? Like I was water and he was dying of thirst? I didn't have answers. But I knew that when he showed up tomorrow, reports or not, something would change. And the scariest part? I wanted it to. He showed up the next evening, no excuse this time. Just knocked, laptop under his arm, and said, "Juliana has people over. Can I work here?" Like it was the most natural thing. Like my apartment had become part of his. I said yes. Of course, I said yes. Gabriel came in, went straight to the table, opened his laptop. He typed numbers into spreadsheets while I pretended to read on the couch. The silence was too comfortable, too dangerous. That was Gabriel's problem. He made silence intimate. 2 hours later, he closed his laptop, stretched with a long sigh, looked at me. "Got coffee?" I stood without answering, went to the kitchen. He followed. And there, in that small space where we barely fit without touching, everything started to unravel. I put the coffee maker on the stove. Gabriel leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Yellow lamplight cast soft shadows on his face. I could feel the exhaustion he carried. It seemed to weigh the air. "Thank you for letting me use your space like this," he said quietly. "You're not invading," I said. "Anytime." He smiled, but sad. "Funny. My own place should be where I want to be. But it's not. Not the first time he'd let something slip, but the first time he didn't immediately hide it." I pulled 2 cups from the cabinet. The coffee was bubbling quietly. "Why not?" I asked. Gabriel went quiet. So long I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he took a slow breath, like he was about to jump from somewhere high. "Because I feel alone there." Simple words, direct, devastating. I turned to face him. He was looking at his hands. "You're married, Gabriel." "I know." A short, humorless laugh. "Funny, right? 7 years married and I've never felt so alone." I didn't know what to say. I said nothing. I turned off the heat, grabbed the pot, poured coffee into cups. Gabriel took his with both hands, like he needed the warmth. "We became roommates," he continued, voice lower. "We split bills, we share space, but nothing else." I can't remember the last real talk. About things that matter. He sipped coffee, paused. I can't remember feeling connected to anyone. The way he said it, confession. Surrender made my chest tight. Until now, he added, looking at me. There it was. The raw truth between us. Impossible to ignore. I should have said something reasonable. Something to create distance. Something to remind us of the boundaries between a married man and the single neighbor he visited every night. But I couldn't. I understood exactly what he was saying. I feel alone too, I admitted, my voice rough. Gabriel met my eyes, waiting. I ended a relationship almost a year ago, I continued. It was intense, and it ended badly. Since then, I've built walls. I stay home, work, avoid involvement. It's safer. I leaned against the opposite counter. Our knees almost touched in the tight space. But safe is also lonely, I said. Gabriel nodded slowly, like each word echoed inside him. And then you show up, I continued, unable to stop. With your weak excuses. And I let you. Because it's been a long time since someone really wanted to be near me. My voice cracked. I hadn't planned this honesty, but I was tired of pretending. Tired of lying to myself about this. The silence that followed was different, not comfortable, charged, heavy with unsaid things, with raw truths that didn't fit in polite words. Gabriel didn't look away. For the first time, he wasn't the serious accountant, the responsible husband, the polite neighbor. He looked lost, desperate for something real. Have you ever felt like you're living the wrong life? He asked suddenly. It caught me off guard. What do you mean? Like decisions that look right on paper but feel wrong inside. Like waking up each day and putting on clothes that don't fit. Everyone thinks you're fine, that your life makes sense, but you know it doesn't. You know you're pretending. He squeezed the cup, eyes on the coffee. Ever felt that? I swallowed hard. Yes, I had. Maybe not the same way. But I knew what it was like to live an edited version of myself. To hide entire parts of who I was, to fit expectations that weren't even mine. Yeah, I said quietly. Gabriel looked up. Our eyes met, and something changed in that moment. Like an invisible door opened between us. A door that, once opened, couldn't be closed. What do you do when you realize that? He asked. That you're living someone else's life? Not rhetorical. He really wanted to know. Like I had an answer he couldn't find. I don't know, Gabriel. My voice was weak, too honest. You have to decide. Keep pretending or start being honest, even if it scares you. He gave a humorless laugh. Scary is mild. I know. Silence returned. Different now. Intimate in a way that went beyond neighborly talk. Gabriel put his cup in the sink and stepped toward me, closing the distance. I felt the warmth of his body. Lucas, he whispered. He raised his hand slowly. I watched his fingers move toward mine. I saw doubt, fear, hunger. His hand stopped centimeters away. Frozen. I didn't pull back. His choice. And we both knew that if he touched me, nothing would ever be the same. The question wasn't if Gabriel was attracted to me. The question was, did he have the courage to admit it? To stop pretending? To be honest with himself? If only for 1 second. His fingers trembled between us, and I realized with terrifying clarity, I wanted him to touch me. I wanted him to choose the truth, even knowing it would hurt. Even knowing it would complicate everything. Because living a lie hurts more. And we were both tired of hurting alone. I held my breath, waiting for the touch that would change everything. But he didn't. Gabriel stood up, muttered goodnight, and left my kitchen like he was running from a fire only he could see. The door closed, and I stayed there, alone, with 2 cooling cups of coffee, with the bitter taste of almost truth. I thought it was over. I thought he'd go back to his apartment, his life, his wife, and pretend that conversation never happened, that we never came close to the cliff where honesty lives. But the next day at 7, the doorbell rang. And when I opened the door, there was Gabriel, holding a book I'd never lent him. We looked at each other. He knew I knew. I knew he knew I knew. The excuse was so weak it was pathetic. But we pretended. Because sometimes pretending is easier than admitting you came back because you can't stay away. I went inside without saying anything. He followed me. I closed the door. The silence in the living room was dense, almost solid. One of those silences that takes up space, that weighs on your shoulders, that makes you forget how to breathe naturally. Have you ever been trapped in a moment where everything you don't say is louder than any word you could speak? That was it. Gabriel stood by the table, hands in pockets, shoulders tense. I leaned against the counter, trying to look casual, but my heart was pounding so hard I knew he could hear it. He looked at the table, at where we'd sat the night before, where he'd almost touched me, where the truth had almost escaped. "Sorry for showing up like this," he said, his voice tense. I wanted to return the book. I lied that it was fine. Lied that it wasn't strange. We kept lying, because lying was our only safe ground. I offered coffee. He accepted. We moved through the kitchen like careful dancers avoiding contact, avoiding closeness, avoiding breaking the fragile illusion of normalcy. We sat. Same table, same chairs, but everything felt different, charged. Like the air was electrically alive, vibrating with everything we weren't saying. Gabriel stirred his coffee without drinking. I pretended to look out the window. Minutes passed heavily. And then he spoke. I couldn't sleep last night. Not a question, not a full confession, just a sentence thrown into the space between us. But it carried so much weight it nearly knocked me over. I looked at him. He looked at me. And for the first time since he arrived, we held each other's gaze. Without looking away, without running, just looking. And I saw it all. Fear. Desire. The war inside him between what he should do and what he wanted to. Between his life and the truth he was discovering. My chest tightened. I knew that war. I'd fought it alone, in silence, for years. The war between wanting acceptance and wanting honesty. Between living comfortably and living authentically. I didn't sleep either, I said. And that was all that needed saying. We knew. We knew what it meant. That the night before changed something. That we'd crossed an invisible line with no going back. Gabriel put his cup on the table. Slowly. Buying time. Gathering courage for something he'd already decided to do but was still afraid of. He took a deep breath and reached across the table. When his fingers touched mine, the world stopped. Skin on skin. A conscious choice. He was choosing the truth. I looked at our intertwined fingers. When I lifted my eyes, Gabriel was already leaning in. I didn't think, didn't breathe, didn't have time. He leaned across the table and kissed me. Quick. 3 seconds, maybe less. Warm lips, slightly trembling, hesitant. A kiss that asked for nothing but said everything. A kiss confirming everything we'd been avoiding, denying, hiding. And for 3 impossible seconds, I let it. Let the truth exist. Let that moment be real. Because sometimes we need 3 seconds of honesty to survive years of lies. But those 3 seconds would demand a price too high. And then Gabriel pulled away, quick, like waking from a trance, like suddenly realizing where he was and what he'd done. His eyes widened. Panic flooded his face like a cold wave. He stood, knocking over the chair. "Sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "Sorry, Lucas, He stepped back. 2 steps, 3, until his back hit the wall. He ran his hand through his hair, desperate, like he could erase what just happened. "I can't do this to you," he said, each word trembling, torn. "I can't. I'm sorry." I stood up, slowly, trying not to scare him more than he already was. "Gabriel." "No." He cut me off, shaking his head. "No, please, don't make this harder." He looked at me with fear, guilt, desperation in his eyes, and I understood what was happening. He wasn't apologizing for kissing me, not for feeling what he felt. He was apologizing because he knew he couldn't give me what I deserved, because anything between us would be complicated, hidden, painful. He was apologizing for dragging me into his mess. "I can't do this to you," he repeated, his voice almost a whisper. "You deserve someone who can choose you. And I can't." He turned, opened the door, and before I could say anything, before I could process, Gabriel left. The door slammed, and I was alone, again. But this time was different, because now I knew it wasn't just me. He felt the same thing. That kiss was real. But knowing didn't make it easier. It made everything infinitely harder. Because it's one thing to imagine someone might want you. It's completely different to know they do, but can't have you. I leaned against the closed door, heart racing, lips still feeling his touch, and I realized something brutal. Sometimes when you finally get what you want is exactly when you realize you can't keep it. Sometimes truth doesn't set you free. It just shows you how big the prison is. And Gabriel had shown me his and mine. Because now I couldn't pretend this was innocent attraction. Couldn't pretend we were just friendly neighbors. That kiss shattered everything, and left me with one terrifying certainty. I wanted Gabriel, and Gabriel wanted me. But wanting wasn't enough. Never was. I slid down the door until I was sitting on the cold living room floor, and I stayed there in the dark, listening to distant traffic, wondering how 3 seconds could change everything. How a kiss could create and destroy at once. How we could finally tell the truth and still end up more lost. I didn't cry. Couldn't. I just sat there, empty and full, feeling the weight of those 3 seconds crushing me. Because now I knew. The truth. Gabriel Santos had kissed me. And then he ran. Not because he didn't want me, but because he wanted me too much. And that was the worst part. Knowing what we had was real. But real didn't mean possible. The only question was, how long until this explodes? When it does, who gets hurt? The answer came faster than I expected, but not how I wanted it. 3 days. Absolute silence. 3 days where Gabriel was on the other side of those doors. I was here, and we both pretended nothing happened. Ever tried to ignore someone living 2 meters away? It's impossible. But Gabriel was trying hard. The first morning, he left at 6:15 without looking at my door. The second night, we crossed in the hallway. He muttered, "Excuse me," and passed like we were strangers, ignoring he'd kissed me 48 hours before. Confusion turned to anger. By the third day, I was exhausted, tired of hearing his footsteps, my heart racing, tired of checking my phone for a message that would never come, tired of replaying that kiss, wondering if I'd imagined the intensity, the way his hand trembled on my face, the low sound he'd made before pulling away in panic. I hadn't imagined it. I knew I hadn't. Gabriel knew it too. So when his door opened at 7 on the third day, I didn't hesitate. I opened my door and stepped into the hallway. He was wearing a suit, always a suit when he came home from work. Tie loosened, the first layer of professional exhaustion peeling back. But when he saw me, his whole body stiffened. Lucas. My name came like a warning. "We need to talk," I said. I can't. Apparently, you never can. He closed his eyes, took a breath. When he opened them, a wall was there. The same polite, distant wall from our first months. I have to go inside, he said, turning. So you're just going to pretend? My voice was louder than intended. Pretend you didn't kiss me? That you didn't want it as much as I did? He froze, hand on the doorknob. Didn't turn. Please, he said quietly. Don't do this. Don't do what? Don't speak the truth? Because that's what you're asking. For me to pretend. Silence. Heavy silence. Then Gabriel slowly turned. What I saw broke me. He looked exhausted. Not from work, from fighting an internal war. His eyes were red-edged, like he'd slept as badly as me, and something else. Desperation. You don't understand, he said, his voice trembling. What's at stake? Then explain. I stepped toward him. Explain why a meaningful kiss needs to be a mistake. Because it was. The words were explosive, but without conviction. I'm married, Lucas. I have a life. I can't just what? Be honest? Feel what you feel? You don't know what I feel. I know what I saw. My voice echoed down the hallway. I saw you looking at me for weeks like you were starving for something nameless. I felt you trembling when you touched me. I heard that sound you made when you kissed me, Gabriel. That sound of someone finally breathing after drowning. He stood frozen. I saw the exact moment his defenses cracked. You were alive in that moment, I continued, quieter but no less intense. Maybe for the first time in years, and now you want the comfortable lie because the truth scares you. Something moved in his face. A tiny muscle twitched near his eye. His lips parted like he was about to speak. Then I saw it. Tears. Not falling. Just gathering at the corners of his eyes, refusing to fall because Gabriel Santos didn't cry. He was in control. Always held it together. Except he wasn't now. I don't know how to do this, he whispered. So low, I barely heard it. How to be this. Be what? He looked at me, and there was so much fear that I felt it in my chest. Honest, he said, and his phone rang. The sound cut between us like a knife. Gabriel flinched and pulled his phone from his pocket with trembling hands. I saw the name before he answered. Juliana. He looked at me, then at the phone, then back at me. And I understood. This was the moment. The choice. Answering meant choosing the lie. It meant going back to the life he'd just said he didn't know how to leave. He answered. Hey, love. His voice changed instantly. Lighter. Controlled. The edited Gabriel for the world. Yeah, just got here. Just talking to the neighbor. The neighbor. Like I was anyone. Like my mouth hadn't been on his 3 days ago. He said more things I didn't process. Dinner. Coming up. He hung up, staring at the phone like it was strange. When he finally looked at me, the tears were gone. The wall was back. But I saw the cracks. Saw how hard it cost him to keep that facade. I have to go, he said. I know. He hesitated, opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. Lucas, No. I shook my head. Don't say anything you're not ready to mean. He nodded slowly, turned toward the door. Gabriel. He stopped, but didn't turn around. When you're ready to be honest, I said, I'll still be here. I heard his breath catch, saw his shoulders rise and fall. Then he opened the door and went in. And I was left alone in the hallway, with the echo of that conversation still vibrating in the air. But something had shifted. Before, I was waiting for Gabriel to admit something to me. Now I understood he needed to admit it to himself first. And those tears he had held back so hard that I don't know how to be honest, whispered like a confession. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of him finally facing the truth he had spent years burying. The question now wasn't whether Gabriel would choose honesty. It was whether he would find the courage to do it before the lie consumed him completely. And all I could do was wait. And hope that he hadn't forgotten how to breathe. But the night he came back would change everything forever. 3 days turned into a week. A week turned into 10 days. The hallway between our apartments never seemed so long and so short at the same time. Long because each step I took toward my door seemed loaded with expectation, with possibility. Short because the distance between us was just 2 doors, just a few meters of cold floor. And yet it felt like an impossible chasm to cross. I stopped waiting. Not because I wanted to, but because waiting was consuming me in a way I couldn't sustain anymore. I returned to my routine. Woke up, worked, ate, slept. All mechanically. All with the feeling that something vital had been ripped from me and I was just pretending I was still whole. It was on a Tuesday, almost midnight, when I heard the knock on the door. 3 knocks. Soft. Almost hesitant. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, doing that thing we do when we can't sleep. That kind of mental inventory of everything that went wrong, everything that could have been different. And then I heard it. Knock, knock, knock. My heart stopped. Literally. I felt that strange suspension, that internal silence where your whole body waits to see if the sound was real or imagined. Then it came again. Knock, knock. Knock. I'll translate this emotionally complex script segment from Portuguese to English, preserving all the markers, formatting, and emotional depth. I stood up. My bare feet touched the cold floor. I walked to the door as if I were walking toward something inevitable, something I knew would change everything, for better or worse. I opened it. Gabriel was there. But not the Gabriel from the hallway, not the polished and composed Gabriel I saw on rushed mornings or formal afternoons. This Gabriel was destroyed. Not physically, but I could see it. In his eyes, in his posture, in the way he held his own arms as if trying to keep himself together. He was wearing a simple t-shirt, jeans. It looked like he'd left home without thinking. His hair was slightly disheveled. And his eyes, those brown eyes I had learned to read so well, were red. Swollen. He had been crying. We stood there, frozen, in the doorway. Him looking at me. Me looking back. Neither of us saying anything because what needed to be said was too big to fit into simple words. Finally, I stepped aside. He came in. I closed the door behind him. The sound of the lock clicking into place seemed absurdly loud in the apartment's silence. Gabriel walked to the window, that big window overlooking the street, and stood there, his back to me, staring out at the city lights beyond. I stayed near the door, waiting, because I knew he had come here to say something, and pushing would break everything. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, hoarse, as if each word cost him something. "Gabriel, you don't have to." I started. I was never honest with myself. He cut me off. Not about who I am, not about what I feel, not about anything. He still hadn't turned around. He kept looking out the window, at the lights, at anything but me. I married Juliana because it was what I thought I should do, because it was what everyone expected, because I thought if I did everything right, if I followed all the rules, I would feel complete. I would feel normal. He paused. His hand came up to his face, rubbing his tired eyes. But I never felt complete. Not from the first day. I felt empty. Like I was living someone else's life. Like I was watching my own existence from the outside, pretending it made sense. I took a step toward him, slowly, as if I were approaching something fragile that could break if I moved too fast. "Gabriel, I'm attracted to men, Lucas." He said it all at once, fast, like he had to force the words out before they suffocated him. I think I always have been, since adolescence, since forever. But I never admitted it, not even to myself. I buried it so deep that I thought it had disappeared, that I had convinced myself it was something else, that it was just a phase, that it was just confusion. He finally turned around, and when our eyes met, I saw everything, the pain, the fear, the exhaustion of years carrying an invisible weight. But it wasn't confusion, he continued. It was who I am. And I spent years, Lucas, years, building an entire life on top of a lie. And now I don't know how to undo it. I don't know if I can. I didn't know what to say. Because there were no right words for this. There was no manual. No script. There was just us two, in that apartment, in that impossible moment. "I can't promise you I'll leave home," Gabriel said, and his voice trembled. "I can't promise you that something will happen between us. I don't even know if I'm brave enough for that. But I needed you to know." "Know what?" I asked, my own voice coming out weaker than I intended. "That the kiss was real." He said that, and it was like the entire world stopped. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an impulse. It was real. And everything I felt, everything I still feel, is real. I closed my eyes. I breathed deeply, because I had waited to hear that. I had wanted to hear that. But now that it was here, now that it was happening, it was more complicated than I imagined. I opened my eyes and looked at him. "Gabriel, I can't be your secret." He blinked, like those words had been a slap. "I can't be the person you look for when you're tired of pretending. I can't be the escape. I can't handle this." "I know," he whispered. "I know that what you're doing now, admitting this, is damn hard. I know it takes a kind of courage most people can't even imagine having. And I respect that. I respect you for being here, for telling me the truth. I took another step toward him. Now we were close. So close that I could see the way he was breathing, irregular, uncoordinated. But I can't wait, Gabriel. I can't stay here, living 2 meters away from you, knowing this exists between us. But it will never be more than this. I'm not strong enough for that. He nodded, slowly, as if every movement of his head cost him everything he had. I understand, he said. And then something shifted in his face. It wasn't relief. It wasn't sadness. It was acceptance. Pure and raw. I just needed you to know that it wasn't anything false. That when I'm with you, I feel. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm being myself. We stood there, silent, in the heavy silence of my apartment. There was so much left unsaid, so much future that would never happen, so much possibility that died there in that instant. But there was also truth, and maybe that's what mattered. Not the happy ending, not the perfect resolution, but the honesty. The courage to look at yourself and tell the truth, even when it hurts. Gabriel took a step back, toward the door, and I let him. Because sometimes loving someone means letting them go, even when it hurts, even when you want to hold on. Before opening the door, he stopped, looked at me one last time. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" I asked. "For not judging me, for listening to me, for letting me be honest." I swallowed hard. You deserve to live your truth, Gabriel, even if I'm not part of it. He nodded, opened the door, and left. The door closed with a soft click, and then there was only silence. I stood there, motionless in the middle of the room, feeling the weight of that moment settle into me. It wasn't relief. It wasn't sadness. It was something in between, something that hurt, but that also felt right. Gabriel had admitted the truth, to me, to himself, and maybe that wouldn't lead to a happy ending. Maybe he'd go back home. Maybe he'd keep living the same life. Maybe nothing would change, but something had changed in him. I had seen it in his eyes. That spark. That first step toward himself. And that, in some twisted and painful way, was more important than anything that could have happened between us. Because sometimes the truth doesn't give you what you want, but it sets you free. And maybe Gabriel would take years to fully understand that. Maybe he'd never get there. Maybe he would. But he had started. And that was already something. I went back to the bedroom, and for the first time in days I could breathe. I had been honest, had validated his courage without sacrificing myself. Some stories don't have happy endings, but they have true ones. And sometimes that's the best we can ask for. Not how much time you've lived, but how much you've lived truthfully.